Uh, Hi, everyone. This is Max, and today I'm talking to Roland Freudenstein, and he's Vice President of GLOBSEC. Hi, Roland. How are you?
Hi, Max. It's great to be here and talk to you.
So, Roland, maybe you can introduce yourself, what you're working on.
Well, GLOBSEC is the leading think tank of Central Europe, I might say. We're based in Bratislava, where I am right now, but normally I live in Brussels and I work there as the head of GLOBSEC Brussels. So GLOBSEC is becoming quite an international think tank too, but we try to be the constructive voice of Central Europe in the Brussels bubble. This is my personal mission. So we know we classically deal with security and defense issues, transatlantic relations, but recently, of course, very intensely Ukraine and how to create security in Europe against Russia, obviously, but also questions of digital policy and Western Balkans, fighting disinformation, cybersecurity. All these are issues that interest us as well.
I was reading on your website you are working on establishing Ukraine Support Council. Did you establish it?
Yeah, it has been established. It is led by former Polish Prime Minister Jan Krzysztof Bielecki. You know, it has important leaders from business, politics, and civil society from several European countries, especially Central Europe. Actually, GLOBSEC just opened up an office in Kiev, and there will be an official inauguration with a trip of the Ukraine Support Council of GLOBSEC in about 10 days to Kiev, where they will inaugurate the new office and, of course, do a lot of liaison with the Ukrainian government, but also bring members of parliament from national parliaments of the European Union to Kiev.
And what this council will focus on? Supporting Ukraine?
Oh, it focuses on anything from humanitarian aid, you know, trying to get generators to Ukraine, equipment, winter clothing for soldiers, and then we also employ Ukrainian scholars here. We have 10 of them at the moment working for GLOBSEC. I personally have hosted them, some of them, in Brussels last week for meetings with EU officials. So, you know, we try to facilitate this strategic cooperation between Ukraine and NATO, Ukraine and the European Union in the run-up to hopefully Ukraine becoming a member of the European Union and NATO one day. And that is our mission. That is our mission vis-a-vis Ukraine, to help right now, but also prepare and accompany the effort to bring Ukraine into the decisive Euro-Atlantic organizations.
Thanks, Roland. Thanks for this answer. And Roland, and what's your view on the latest developments in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, you know, to the surprise of many people in spring who predicted otherwise, Ukraine is winning this war. The question is how quickly, and of course, with how many victims and losses on the Ukrainian side. So I think that unfortunately, Russia has slightly improved its military performance recently. They have learned from their blatant mistakes of the early months of the war, but there are some structural reasons why Russia cannot win this war anymore. The question is how long will it take? And here's the thing. Many Western leaders and governments are now saying we need peace negotiations as quickly as possible. Fortunately, that's not the majority of leaders, because the rational approach to this question is that you know, under this current circumstances, negotiations would most likely end up in some kind of territorial losses for Ukraine, which are unacceptable. And therefore, Ukraine has to use the military momentum in order to create the conditions for a lasting peace. But that is unfortunately several months and maybe more than a year away from us.
What do you think are the highest risks for Ukraine right now, and how they can be addressed?
Well, the risks are obviously in the energy infrastructure, which means civilian casualties. Very simply, in the winter that is now beginning, with sub-zero temperatures across the country, Ukraine will have a hard time, saving everyone's lives, and this is exactly what Russia intends to achieve. So, civilian losses, destruction of infrastructure, maybe one day not only energy infrastructure, and I mean across the whole country. We already have these destructions, of course, in the areas attacked by Russia directly. But I mean, all this is the big risk for the upcoming months. Militarily, there is a risk of Russia escalating, although I think it has been exaggerated. I mean, one should take it seriously when Putin plays around with the idea of using nuclear weapons, for example. But we make this more likely by panicking and saying that, oh, he's threatening us, NATO or Ukraine with nuclear weapons, so we have to pressure Ukraine to negotiate. That is the completely wrong approach. That actually makes the use of nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction by Russia more likely. Also, blackmail with nuclear power stations, as we all know from the documents that were released a couple of days ago by a British think tank, Royal United Services Institute. We all know that it's very much part of Russia's playbook to blackmail the West with, accidents or incidents at nuclear power stations. And we've seen this kind of blackmail at work in Zaporizhia in recent months. So, all these forms of escalation are highly dangerous, of course. The one thing we have learned from the missile incident at the Polish-Ukrainian border 2 weeks ago is that Russia is still definitely shies away from a direct conflict with NATO. That's also an important thing to know. And that is good news for NATO's military, or the military support of NATO member states, I should say, to Ukraine, because these supplies seem to be running smoothly for the moment and not really strategically disturbed by Russian actions. Now, there's two more risks for Ukraine that I see. One is that the weapons supply runs out. For some European countries, the military leaders claim that they cannot deliver any more weapons because their reserves are depleted. Now, that's always a definition. It's a question of definition. I mean, what's a totally depleted reserve? In some cases, I would even claim that weapons used by the European countries in active duty they serve European security more if they're used in Ukraine than if they're in some kind of depot or in some kind of barracks in West European countries. So that, and then the United States still has plenty of material to give away. So I think this is maybe not an immediate risk, but it's something that Putin is certainly betting on. And there's a second aspect that he's betting on even more, which is that unity ends in the West and countries go different ways about Ukraine, that the West is going to be split. Now, so far, this has not happened, or not happened on a large scale, because, of course, we've got countries like Hungary that completely and consciously, deliberately, put themselves politically outside of the Western consensus, but they have so far carried the sanctions policy against Russia, and there too, I don't see a split over winter, even if the economic recession becomes very bad in the West. I don't see a concrete reason to doubt a continuation of Western unity, but the risk is there.
Okay, I see. So what do you think is Russia really trying to achieve? Because they withdrew from Kherson, for instance, withdrew from Kharkiv Oblast. Are they trying to reposition as they claim, or are they just withdrawing because due to the failure of military?
Well, you know, I mean, the withdrawal from Kherson was clearly a sign of Russia learning from its own mistakes that it had made previously. So they wanted to preserve the soldiers for a later counterattack, maybe in spring, after having regrouped, restocked, resupplied, and put new reserves in manpower to the front line. Now, you know, these are things Russia can change to an extent. It's the tactics, it's the command structures, it is the slightly smarter way of dealing with losses and withdrawals. But there are a couple of things that Russia cannot change. And that is, first of all, the corruption, because it's endemic, it's systemic, right? Corruption is part and parcel of the Putin system. So he cannot finish with corruption, and corruption is a big, big obstacle to Russian military success. And second, the military stocks that Russia has are dwindling very, very quickly at the moment. In some areas, we already saw the use of duds, I mean, missiles, with nuclear-capable missiles without warheads, even without a conventional warhead. Now, that can still cause some destruction, but this is according to many experts, is a sign of the total depletion of missile reserves on the Russian side, and that's just one example. We've got the same with high standard tanks, for example, main battle tanks, where production just cannot keep up. And that's not so much the question of industrial production, that's the question of sophisticated elements such as semiconductors that these weapons need, and where the sanctions policy has, by and large, successfully kept Russia at a loss of these deliveries. So to sum it up, I think that the intention on the Russian side is to regroup, but this could only be successful if the West splits, the Western military supplies to Ukraine strategically diminish, and the Ukrainians lose their will to fight, or at least weaken in their determination to resist the aggression. Now, all three things are not the case for the moment, and I don't see them happening in the next 6 months or so. And if Ukraine overcomes and militarily survives, which I very strongly assume, I think there will be time for a renewed Ukrainian counter offensive in spring, so that actually the Kremlin's calculation will completely flounder.
So in the meantime, how can Ukraine protect better sky from those barbarian Russian attacks by drones and rockets? How can the West help better? What do you think?
Well, we all saw immediately after the initial volleys of massive Russian missile attacks against the civilian energy infrastructure that people in the West switched their emphasis from infantry weapons, you know, territorial weapons such as tanks and so on, to air defense. Air defense became the big new priority. You know, besides, of course, power generators and repair equipment for energy grids and so on. So I think that there is on the one hand a constant need of sophisticated air defense systems, such as the IRIS-T from Germany, for example. But I mean, this is one single unit has been delivered. 3 new units will be ready next year for delivery, early next year, so in a couple of weeks actually. But this is far too little, and this sophisticated air defense equipment is too expensive to be used on cheap drones like the Shahed 136 and so on from Iranian production, which costs like 20,000 euros or so to produce. And for this, you need less sophisticated air defense equipment, such as the German Gepard anti-aircraft tank, which has proven probably the most successful of the German delivered larger weapon systems. But of course, here the supply is limited, and I think the West should creatively find other ways to deliver simpler and cheaper air defense systems that can successfully combat the drones that Russia uses massively, and of which new deliveries will arrive, as we all know. So, you know, here on these drones, there is unfortunately no end in sight when it comes to the numbers. So I think cheap air defense systems, very simple but massive in numbers, air defense systems are the next new priority for Ukraine.
I see an already inflicted damage. I read that it's around 40% of infrastructure damaged. Is there a way for the West to help speed up its recovery also, do you think?
Yes, I mean, that means above all equipment and material for quick repairs. But I think much more importantly is power generators of all sizes, right? From big to household size, to make Ukrainian society more resilient in terms of energy. I think that's a big priority. And fortunately, these are things that are not so difficult to produce in masses very quickly, right? I mean, when it comes to air defense systems, at least the sophisticated ones, or for example, tanks, you know, the West has decreased its production lines so massively in the last 2 decades that it's very, very difficult to ramp this up very quickly. That is different for things like power generators. You know, these things, for the production capacity for that kind of gear can be ramped up very quickly. And I think this is exactly what is happening right now. So these are things that one can immediately do to make up for the losses in energy infrastructure that Ukraine had.
And in case of new attacks, and in case if this whole infrastructure is paralyzed, I heard Ukrainian authorities were saying that they would have to relocate the people, or more people will probably have to go to Europe, right? So how can Ukraine better prepare? Is it at all prepared for this type of scenario in case of total blackout of energy infrastructure?
I don't see a total blackout, simply because for the next couple of weeks, at least for winter, I really don't think Russia has the military means anymore. In other words, it lacks the sophisticated missiles for this. So that there will be no total blackout. We can see further degradations of the energy infrastructure, but I do emphasize that here I see good ways to counter this by making Ukraine more resilient, capable of repairing more quickly, but also replacing large energy grids by small energy production in local places.
I see. And do you think that Ukraine will be able, if all goes well, and Ukraine kicks out Russian troops from its territory, will it be able to regain all territories? Will Ukraine be able to regain Crimea as well, you think, or not?
I think it's a possibility. It would presuppose, however, a much larger collapse of the Russian front than we have seen so far. We have seen many incidents in the past where, for example, subordinates killed their commanding officers. We have seen incidents where larger numbers of soldiers defected or surrendered. But it so far this has always been limited to maybe company-sized units, not even a battalion, I think. But I could see a point where Russian losses become so massive, like in face of a Ukrainian counteroffensive in spring, that you see a larger collapse, a panic of a larger scale among Russian troops. In that case, I could see things like, first of all, Ukrainian forces splitting the Russian front by marching towards the Sea of Azov, and then also actually reconquering large parts of Crimea. And then the question is if the rest of the Russians want to stay there or want to give up, and this could happen very quickly. So I do not exclude the whole of Crimea being in Ukrainian hands by summer or by the end of 2023. But this presupposes that something more strategic happens to the Russian front. So that we see a real military collapse. There is, of course, the fact that of the remaining population in Crimea, a majority is now feel Russian. This is a simple fact. So Ukrainian forces would have to face a new situation where large parts of the civilian population, maybe except for Tatars, will be hostile to Ukrainian soldiers. I mean, this is something that I'm sure military planners in Ukraine are taking into account at the moment. I think it's a bit futile for us civilians to speculate at this point how exactly this might happen. The reconquest of Crimea might happen. The same goes, by the way, to a certain degree also for some areas of the Donbass, those areas that were Russian occupied before the 24th of February this year. So there will be numerous difficulties for reconquest, but militarily it is possible, provided that there is a large-scale collapse, military collapse of Russian troops, which is maybe slightly less likely at the moment, because, as I said, Russia is regrouping. They have become a little bit smarter and learned from their previous mistakes, but that does not mean that they are militarily out of the woods. So this collapse can still happen.
How do you think they can be held more accountable for their actions, financially, economically? Can something more be done to do it?
No, I don't see except for further sanctions, I don't see what could happen at the moment. The big question will come when Russia does withdraw, does try to get into some kind of more cooperative relationship with the rest of the world, and that will be a very interesting moment then, because that will also be the moment when I would say human reason would suggest some kind of war crimes trial, some kind of reparation moment for Russia. And we will see how the Russian government at that moment and the Russian people at that moment will react. I think it will be extremely difficult. I mean, first of all, by that time, Russia is going to be economically even worse off than it is now. So the question of immediate reparations is economically just not possible at that moment. It will have to be sometime in the midterm future then. But the question of being personally accountable and having war crimes persecuted and so on, that is, I mean, one can demand an international criminal court procedure or a special court opened up here, but it will all depend on the circumstances of that moment when actually Russia recognizes its mistakes and changes course radically.
All right, Roland, thank you so much. I ran out of all my questions, and thanks for providing all the answers.
Well, thanks, Max. It's a tragic thing to discuss all this, but it's absolutely necessary. So thank you.
Thank you.